it's all artifice, it's all convenience. They change the, people are wearing clothes that are 20 years out because they look better or they catch the light better. We're fabricating stuff because it suits an idea of history. And so the idea that you wouldn't have black characters or black actors, that's an illusion that suggests the rest of it is all real. People would look very different. They'd be shorter. They'd smell. People would have really bad teeth. The sort of, if you watch something like Monty Python and the Holy Grail, that's what the past would look much more like. People would just be muddy and stinky and ugly, And the idea that, and if you're not going to do that, then
I think that's a slightly different thing, in a way. I think if you do something in the particular past, if you kind of go pretend that it doesn't like that, doesn't necessarily mean you need to address it directly. That's part of the story. Remember the Daleks. There's a lot of race stuff in there. The whole thing is about racism, really. But even casual kind of 60s racism, which sounds awful. Ace, she's at the boarding house and there's a sign on the window that says no comments. She decides to leave. And the neo-Nazis are all very, master race kind of thing, which is what the Daleks were about, actually. I like that in Remember the Daleks because that was what the 60s were like. Very much worse than that, actually. But they touched on it without pretending none of that existed.
Yeah, I think there's a fine line to draw between, gratuitously expressing racist opinions all over the place and airbrushing racism out of history as it doesn't happen, which seems to me rather disrespectful to people who suffered it. As long as there is a strong kind of stand against it, I'm not against the authenticity.
Anywhere else apart from on the telly and that sort of thing. So yes, what I'll do in time-honored fashion is it seems to be working into a bit of a thing here. Is I'll let the panel actually introduce themselves. And kicking off, I'm Sarah Brunner-Bacon. I actually appear in the books as a character. So I'm kind of here not really as a fan, not as a writer, but actually as a fictional character. Several, including one by Mr. McKinty, but also Return of the Living Dad as an Admiral, Anti-Dalek Fleet with my then wife, and so on, and various others as well. So, anyway, I'll hand over to Simon now.
Hello, I'm Simon Guerrier. I write Doctor Who books and comics and audio plays and websites and banners and stuff. And my qualification here is I wrote a history of the wilderness years, which is very expensive but really, really good and has some terrible jokes.
I'm Rebecca Levine. These days I write other fun stuff like an epic fantasy series that I've just launched, but back in the day I edited New Adventures, which was one of the ways in which Doctor Who continued out on the telly.
And I'm David McEntee. I wrote several of those New Adventures and other books in the Virgin and BBC ways before moving on and editing, writing other history. Hopefully I can remember some of this stuff because it's like 20 years ago.
Yes, and for those of you who have been to other panels on the Doctor Who track, it's always a very last minute thing as to who gets to moderate. So I was basically told about a minute ago thereabouts. So thanks to Liz, thank you. So apologies, this is not terribly polished or anything. I think what we'll also do is we'll have a bit of a chat about a few different things, trying to dredge up memories of that time when it wasn't between telly shows, basically, and a bit beyond that, because a lot of it has actually continued on. There are books still being done, short stories, pretty much everything that Simon keeps doing, basically. That's fine. Something that's quite good. yeah, but then I'll open up basically to questions and things. Yeah, any comments that people want to make. But just very quickly, just a bit of a show of hands. Who's read any of the New Adventures, BBC books, comics, listened to Big Finish, podcasts, etc.? Excellent. Brilliant. So there's a couple of people there that we'll be recommending to, or indeed asking other people to recommend what they like as well. Okay, I guess opening up first, I think we can go way back in time. So apologies. Rebecca? Yes. Would you like to just explain a little bit about actually what the New Adventures were?
Yeah, I mean, they were started before I joined Redwood Peter Lawrence, who we owe a lot to, I think. He was the guy who said he was doing some of the last Target books that were sort of running out of Target novelisations to do, and had the idea of doing original fiction, but didn't want to do the typical time thing. He wanted to do books for the audience as it had grown up. And the New Adventures were the continuing adventures of the Seventh Doctor and his companions' stories too broad, too deep for the small screen, which often meant swearing and sex, but also meant putting out complicated stories and exploring character in a way that the TV show didn't always have time back then. And we also did the Missing Adventures, which were sort of in between stories. Yeah, that's what they were.
David, do you want to actually explain the books you did back then?
I don't think I could explain the books. I had no idea what I was doing. And people keep come up to me and ask, oh, why did you do this line, or why did you do this thing? And I'm like, I don't remember, it was 20 years ago. Yeah, I think my take on it was trying to imagine doing it with a bigger budget, basically. The two broad and two deep. Yeah, it's a different format, I suppose, but at the same time, if it was a TV show or a movie, it would have an unlimited budget. And, try to imagine that we've gone with that people could imagine. And also there was a couple of things I wanted to do that you didn't really get in the TV show. Basically taking stories and setting them outside the home characters. And let's do the Caribbean, let's do India, let's do medieval France, whatever. Pure historical and that kind of stuff. And try not to mess it up too badly. Basically.
I think we're very fortunate in where the show left off. To pick up from, I think, the Seventh Doctor and what Cartmel was doing towards the end of that run was particularly fruitful from what we see. It was impossible to play with, and yes, some people disappeared up our own arse, but I still think it would have been harder to follow on from a lot of other areas and the kind of stuff we were doing. So we had a lot of time for Cartmel as well.
Yeah. I think there's two things to say very briefly before bringing Simon into it. Is first off, the publishing schedule, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think it started off about one novel every 2 months or so, rather quickly got up to 1 month, one every month, which was a new story, and then 2 every month for a while, which is an
and wanted to do their own 8th Doctor books. And Peter, running the New Adventures, went, hang on a minute, we've got this license. So the BBC then looked into it and realised how successful these books were and they sold. So they, rather to Peter's horror, said, well, we'll just do our own Doctor when your license comes to an end. We'll just take over. And to begin with, they had exactly the same schedule. They had 8 Doctor books instead of 7 Doctor books every month, and they had past Doctor books every month. And they used quite a lot of the same authors. And in some cases, they followed some of the same themes and stuff. And then it was 3 years into that, the sales were not so good, so they dropped to monthly.
It's largely because we lost their original American distributor, as I recall. Suddenly that happened. The weird thing is when they started them, of course, when Nuala Buffini commissioned like the first half dozen, and there was this talk about, oh no, they'll be they'll be completely separate, you know, they won't have continuity in the Virgin range and so on, and then they hire other Virgin authors to do them who just would continue with their what had been done before and did it that way, so that plan didn't last very long. And I don't think anybody can play it.
I think another strand here, which I've got to say I don't know much about, so it's entirely from these guys, is also Doctor Who magazine, continued through those years, but it is an amazing and again a unique feature of publishing, I think, isn't it? In the sense of a long-running magazine that's actually been picking up circulation, especially since the show's come back. But
Doctor Who magazine's sales went up while the show wasn't on. Magic. They're uniquely under licensed stuff. Most, Torchwood, when Torchwood was cancelled, or when the show stopped being made, Titans magazine was basically going, we've probably got one more issue, that's probably it, and they managed to get to 2 and they were quite pleased with that. But yeah, Doctor Who magazine's readership went up as a result of John Freeman, who was the editor at the time, making decisions like, well, we'll make the articles a bit more adult, because he saw the same thing that Doctor Who fans, as Peter does, that Doctor Who fans generally were older. What Doctor Who could do, I think, and a general public who had an idea of Doctor Who being a rather silly, running down corridors sort of thing, there was a depth and complexity and a level of surprise and the kind of subjects that they were prepared to tackle that I think is definitely comes from that period when it was freer, because you could get away with stuff. Because
I wouldn't also take too much credit, because Ross was an incredibly clever person who knows television inside out. He created what he thought would work, and he was absolutely right. And yeah, I think the books were some influence, but I think it's also just his own genius.
No, I think I already get it, man. And we did have Russell versus Stephen Moffat last year. So everything was sort of covered there. The one, I think it basically came out as we'd love to see, we saw Stephen Moffat write under Russell's producership, we'd love to see Russell write one under Stephen.
So
to see how
Stephen asks every year.
Yeah.
One final one to the panel is basically, because the nature of this panel is actually about introducing people to all of this who don't know about it, essentially. So, I guess, which particular story, whether it be comic strip, novel, even the short story collections, whichever, would you actually recommend to someone who might like Doctor Who now, may have dabbled in some of the old series, but might not have, but actually just sort of wants to read something. It's not just a novelisation. It would
have to be also people.
I think it would depend on what sort of side of things they like. But do they like the historical, the science fiction side? That basically, it's going to be a tie between also people and human nature. End of.
I think I entirely agree with those. There are lots of new adventures I love. I think David's Sanctuary, which is a pure historical Doctor Who novel about the Knights Templar, is I'm a bit embarrassed to say it in front of him, but I think it's an amazing piece of work, an amazing piece of research, and it's just very compelling and has a beautiful ending that was so good that it cast a shadow over the books that followed and stuff, which I just think is very good. I think from the comic strips, lots of very good comic strips, but Ground Zero, which is where Garrett Gillett, the editor, decided to break with the New Adventures, which was quite shocking at the time, and basically made it very explicit that the comic strip and what the books were doing was no longer a thing. Very controversial at the time, but an amazing story. If you're going to break the rules, that's an amazing story, full of all sorts of things that I still am amazed they got away with. And for audio, I really like Doctor Who and the Pirates, which is and if you haven't heard it, dude, it's spectacular. It's one of those things that, as a writer, I just wish I'd thought of it first. It's really good and mad and funny and beautiful, and Colin Baker sings.
I think for audio, obviously, basically anything we call
Yes.
I don't really like the Sixth Doctor that much on TV, but in the audio, he's my favourite. So.
Thank you. Open it up to the audience now, basically. So,
the panel has kind of spoken mainly about books and touched on commentary for the audience. I was wondering what their feelings were about some of the more bootleggy videos and things that came out in the 90s, which also then crossed into the books because you published novelizations of titles like Shakedown. I mean, it seems now that whenever a spin-off comes out, it's been completely authorised by the BBC, but back then it almost seemed like the Wild West in terms of Doctor Who stuff.
Yeah, I think it was, I think like a lot of things, Doctor Who, it was ahead of its time. I mean, you look on YouTube now and you'll find a lot of fan-made, very professionally made videos, all kinds of things. I mean, I'm a fan of Portal, for example. There's some amazing fan-made videos, obviously not licensed. So I think it was just, obviously that's not for profit in the way that the Doctor Who ones were. But yeah, I think sort of fan creativity can't be held back, and I think Peter's genius was to tap into that fan creativity.
And I think there's also a sense of that community sense that I talked about, which was that everybody was pulling together because they were all kind of holding the show together and stuff. And actually, the TV movie, in sort of allowing people to break up and do their own thing, part of that is because the TV movie was actually quite successful in terms of an audience and public response. It was like, oh no, actually, people know what Doctor Who is and are quite open to it being bigger and madder and stuff. Whereas, I think before that, there was a sense that we were quite a small community holding on to something precious. So that if you got the rights to the song titles made straight to video, the books and the magazine should kind of support that and be part of it and, all hold together.
Yeah, I think there's also kind of a feeling, as I say, the community thing, because it's like, you've got writers and actors and all the rest of it, know each other from when they've worked before or when they've been in conventions or everybody sort of knew each other. And it's like, you want to do that? Yeah, that would be fun. Yeah, okay. And it's largely sort of done for, it's fun. I'll do it as a favour to this mate. That's how these things happen. Of course, you get YouTube videos is much more sort of individual people, I think. But I love if any of you have seen the anime one, the Doctor Who there's anime, it's like 15 minutes. It's a third Doctor story with Dalek, Cybermen, two masters, and it's just mad because it is so well done. I wish somebody would actually make that as a full-length movie or a series. I'd write a novelisation. So if you try and find that, it's really good.
I mean, it certainly is true that back in the day we all went to tavern every month. And everyone did talk to everyone. There was a sense that everyone was actively involved in it at that time because it was such a small group. And I don't know if taverns are still going.
Yeah, but I went in June.
Oh yeah.
There's a pub in London on the first Thursday of every month. Fans meet. There was a rumour that the pub was going to close or something. And actually, a friend of mine, assistant producer at Big Finish, Paul Square, I don't want to get in April, which is all a bit of a shock because he was 38 and stuff. And it made one of the things that was discussed at his funeral was kind of how nostalgic we were for the days when we were all kind of fans meeting in the pub and stuff. And so when this rumour circulated, a whole bunch of Stephen Hopper came, lots of people, I think there are some regulars who've been going all the time, there's a wilderness years pound, but people who've been going to that. But I went to that pub because there was an article or something, something was written about this pub where you could go and you could talk to the Doctor Who writers. And I was on a mailing list, and I was at university at the time, and me and other students I knew from this mailing list who would get to the computer rooms at the same time late in the evening after the pubs had closed, because that's how the thing worked. Me, Eddie Robson, who's now doing lots of Doctor Who stuff, Will Howells, who's on the Time team for Dr. Magazine, and Matt Michael, who reviews stuff for Dr. Magazine, we all agreed we would meet up at this park, so we didn't have to go alone. And that's how we met. And then we met Paul Cornell, who told us we should be doing fanzines, and so we did, and it's created a monster.
Because I'm writing fantasy now, and a couple of friends of mine who are fancy with this thing called Super Relax Fantasy Club, which is a monthly meet-up of fancy writers and interested in fantasy, and it's grown quite a lot over the sort of few months it's been going, and it made me think very much about it's nice to meet in the flesh. How great the internet is, it's nice to actually know in person.
Genuinely.
Sometimes it's a disaster, but
And I think actually the international component too, I'm originally from Australia, I know there's Americans in the audience, and we've all been to town, because it's sort of also how we met, and it's that friendship thing. I think also that too, Doctor Who is not unique, but it is fairly special in the way that it's always blurred the boundaries between fans and producer. Not usually in the way that people expect, and things. And really what I'm talking about here is during the 80s and even before that, quite a lot of fans worked at the BBC, they got to see how it was made, they got to know people, that sort of thing. We've spoken before about the amazing thing about the open slush pile. Again, loads of fans actually got through that slush pile. Like my friend Kate Orman, for example, was one. And my own, I've been a fan of Doctor Who forever. I was off it with the Colin Baker years and off at university, all of that sort of stuff. Came back, didn't actually know anything about the New Adventures, but I remember walking into a bookstore and going, oh, what are these? They're not novelisations.
That's actually a question for David. Am I remembering that you pitched a story for the latter end of the television series? And so was that in any way connected to your Doctor Who adventures?
Sort of. I did pitch a Lovecraftian story, and
This is to the TV show.
to the TV show in like 88, 89, and Andrew Cartmel was giving me feedback, and then the show got cancelled, so we never got any further. But it was kind of in the process. And I was somewhat surprised that many years later to see a DWM article saying, oh yeah, the Doctor would have regenerated into Richard Griffiths in David Mackenzie script. And I was like, no, what? Yeah, as much as I'd like to have killed off Sylvester, the story did have a sort of what Mendon where they could have done it. But as far as feeding into the New Adventures, it was a Lovecraftian thing. There were a couple of character names that are reused in like Darkness, but not plot elements or anything. So that's the limit.
I think we'll wrap up now, so final comments?
just always great to see that there's any continued enthusiasm for these books that I worked on so long ago that were such an important part of my life. My career.
I'm amazed that I remember so much.
I owe my career to Howard Sport and that letter from Andy Bogle, and the very idea that you could be a fan of Doctor Who and write it, and that was actually a possibility, and there was a process to do that, still thrills me, and I still can't, that I'm extraordinarily grateful.
In our lives, and for me it was these librarians had 1,000 applicants for that job, and for reasons that were not much to do with my superior qualifications for what I got the job, and that was my turn that moment to change everything about my life for the better.
Oh, and also there's free Doctor Who stickers.
And I'll just end off basically by saying thank you to the panel, thank you to you, and just what such a rich vein of stuff, the New Adventures, the comics, the Missing Adventures, the BBC books, the Big Finish stuff, all of that, and it's still being mined today, it's still in production a lot of it today, And yeah, just the simple fact that even like other missing stories that were never made either for the TV show or whatever are actually still being made, which is fantastic. So, thank you.
So, welcome to representation of gender roles in Doctor Who. Thank you all very much for coming. Hopefully, despite the fact it has been a long con with lots of very interesting discussions sort of whizzing around my brain, I don't know about anybody else, we'll be able to get some fresh stuff out of us, even though I think we're all a little bit tired. But it's going to be great. My name's Amy, I'm Such Heights. I'm going to be moderating this panel, hopefully in a relatively reasonable sort of a way. So it'll be sort of the usual kind of ground rules. I think probably that we're going to kind of try and have a bit of a discussion up here before putting things out to the audience for question and comment. So if you have any questions or things you'd like to say, if you could perhaps hold on to them to slightly later in the session, then we can take them. Does that sound right? So in just a sec, I will let my lovely fellow panelists introduce themselves, but just quickly about me. When I'm not cosplaying Disney Princess, I can also be found kind of having a lot of kind of media fandom, transformative fanworks type stuff is sort of my thing. So I got into Doctor Who via the new series. I've also done fanfic, I've made vids, that kind of thing. I've since gone back and enjoyed a lot of the classic series and the audios and, you know, the sort of endless universe. But yeah, New Who is definitely kind of my entry point to the thing that I'm most familiar with and a kind of all over aspect. And I think, actually just another ground rule that I was going to say kind of specific to this panel is I think obviously there's a lot of stuff to cover, and there's some good bits and some less good bits about the show, and we should definitely discuss all of those things. I think that we would like to try and keep it specific when we're being critical, and to kind of keep it sort of relevant to the text, because people will have strong opinions about which bits are good and which bits aren't. And also, like, I'm sure that this will not come up, but I would like to avoid any character bashing of the type of, oh, well, you know, the old school companions just twisted their ankles a lot and were really pathetic, because we will go outside and we will fight.
It's not true, it only happens 3 times.
That also. So yeah, those kinds of generalizations and misconceptions about characters are not welcome, and we can hopefully avoid also just sort of writing off whole eras of the show, past and present, and just try and keep it a little bit more kind of nuanced, as we've got quite a nice bit of time here. So that's the hope. I will now like to ask my lovely fellow panellists, Una and Simon, to please introduce themselves.
I'm Una McCormack. Can you hear me okay? Is that all right? Yeah. I'm Una McCormack. I have been a fan of the show since, I don't know. I was born in 1972. I think I've been a fan since 1950. So sometimes feels like a fan since a very small girl. Grew up watching Sarah Jane, and I think she taught me the phrase "women's liver," which I used only half understood to a teacher in my primary school. Since then, I've gone on to write fan fiction. I've written Doctor Who novels, a few books, a few short stories, and just recently my first Doctor Who play with Big Finish, which was a riff on the Dorothy L. Sayers story Gordy Night. Had lots of lovely female characters in. So that's my background.
My name is Simon Guerrier. I write Doctor Who books and comics and audio plays and stuff. But today I am the representative of the heteronormative patriarchy. I don't know what that means, but maybe we'll find out.
Oh, wonderful. So I feel like if we can, I know we will have some anger about the heteronormative patriarchy, but Simon's actually very nice if we can keep the rotten fruit sort of in the bags for now, unless he says anything particularly obnoxious, and then all bets are off. I'm sure both of you have come with sort of specific things you'd like to talk about, but I was wondering if maybe we could start on something quite general, which is the way that gender roles are kind of embedded into the show as a whole, and kind of the overall concept of the show, because I think there's kind of a slightly interesting two sides to that, because on the one hand, like, this is, it's a show in which we have this madman in a blue box, and that's his thing, and he goes around. And but he's often, but not always, not exactly your typical action hero. He has his moments, but generally speaking, we're not really, he's no James Bond. So in terms of like the Doctor's kind of masculinity and how we see that is perhaps not always what you might get in a leading man. Sort of the origins of the show, really, because as we've already mentioned briefly, there is this stereotype about the screaming, ankle-twisting, "Doctor, what's going on?" companion, who, as far as I know, has never actually existed. But in actual fact, we start off and we have Susan, and we have Ian, and we have Barbara, who all three of whom I think are really interesting characters from a gender point of view. And obviously, Barbara in particular, I would argue, others may disagree with me, kind of starts to set the standard for the kind of person that a companion's going to be. And I mean, I was fascinated by your point earlier about the way that they start to shape the Doctor's moral compass. And so I was just wondering if we could talk about Barbara for a bit, really. Because I was really, really struck when I first went back and watched An Unearthly Child, having not known a huge amount about Classic Who and having heard the stereotypes about what it was like. And Barbara was absolutely nothing like I was expecting, really, because I knew everyone loved her, so there had to be a really good reason. And I was like, oh no, she's just really cool, okay. So yes, Barbara.
Yeah, Barbara, well, she's obviously completely awesome, isn't she? I mean, she's just absolutely... Do we have an age for Barbara? Do we know if she's in her 20s or her...
The actress, Jacqueline Hill, was in her early 30s.
In her early 30s, but the character is presumably a little younger? Or?
As I remember, the character notes say that she's 28, and when she's Lola in the original, Lola is 28, and Cliff, who comes in, is 35, I think.
Sorry, Lola and Cliff. Wow, that's amazing.
They're Eurovision entry.
You can read the original pitch documents and the early paperwork, which include Sidney Newman's notes handwritten on that says "nuts!" exclamation mark, on the bbc.co.uk/archives. There's a collection of early Doctor Who documents, some of which are magnificently manned. What he was in exile from is explained in it. One of the best things, he's in London in An Unearthly Child because he's developing colour television. That's what. And so when he says the way the TARDIS works is because it's like television, it's because he's an expert in television.
Wow. There's like this whole AU out there about like Lola and Cliff and their adventures in colour TV. If anybody wants to kind of take that around a bit, please do. But yeah, so
I guess Barbara I put in a context of it's a really exciting time for women in the early 60s. You've got a bit of money in your pocket, you've got a bit of independence. If you're living in London, you're maybe living with a couple of friends. You're not stuck at home. You're an independent young woman trying to make a living. And I think Barbara is representing that. I think you see it. I think you see these characters again throughout the 60s show in particular. 70s is a bit crapper for women, I think. But what Barbara represents for me is that excitement of being a young professional woman. And you would be a bit, we've got lovely Verity Lambert on the show, and you don't want to go straight from real life to say this is what the character is like. But I think it's a very good representation of what it must have been like to be a young professional woman. Barbara wouldn't be phased by things, I think. If I can just say something tedious about Ian as well, I think.
We should talk about some of the guys too, I suppose.
It struck me whether there's a war veteran context with him. He's probably not old enough to have been in the war. But
he'd have done national service.
He'd have done national service, yeah. So there's that element to him as well. But Barbara.
So we've got a hand in the audience as well.
I don't know if it's okay to do questions and comments yet, or if you're assuming on the...
I mean, if you have a sort of specific quick question or correction, by all means.
Just a quick thing about Barbara. I completely agree that she's very competent and not fazed by stuff particularly, or no more so than Ian. But there's one really weird bit in the end Edge of Destruction, where the TARDIS seems to all be going wrong and they think they're going to die, and the Doctor, towards the end, takes Ian aside and says he thinks that there's no hope. It's like, I don't want to tell the women, will you face it with me? And it's like, why is Ian better than Barbara or Susan for this confidence? Like,
wow, that's really bizarre. I haven't seen this one.
Because the Doctor's a stupid old man.
Yeah.
The Doctor nearly kills his granddaughter and Ian Barbara several times in those early stories, and he's wrong about a whole load of things. He's prejudiced, he's stupid, and he's wrong a lot. And that's, I would argue, that's an argument. In that episode, Barbara has one of my favourite things that she ever does, where he says that it's all her and Ian's fault, and Barbara lashes at him and says something along the lines of, accusers, you should get down on your knees and thank us. And it's just... and the Doctor doesn't really respond, but you can see, I suspect William Hart's kind of going himself.
It's a very weird episode. Like, it turns out the reason why the TARDIS is crashing is because the fast return switch has been left on, and the Doctor explains to everyone how a switch works. And
that is advanced Gallifreyan technology, I understand.
Just with television, colour television,
it's
fresh from Gallifrey.
In general.
It is a very odd episode.
I think that two-part is about the horrors of the nuclear family, so I think that.
It's also, that's not uncommon for what telly was doing at the time. And the very first episode of Doctor Who, Unearthly Child, that first 25 minutes, which I think is a masterpiece. I genuinely think that's the best opening episode of any TV show ever. It's so beautifully done. The only characters in it are the four leads, the only speaking parts in it. And it sets up a classic kitchen sink. There's something odd about this girl at school. Very, very straightforward, very like an awful lot of television drama at the time. And then it becomes something completely different and utterly compelling. But that Edge of Destruction is not dissimilar to other kinds of drama that you get, the kind of experimental Royal Court stuff, where the Radiophonic Workshop used to do a lot of sound effects for of people having mental breakdowns and that sort of stuff. And it's very much Susan attacking the parent figures with a pair of scissors, which represents her crisis of angst.
Baby boom generation.
The amount of interminable stuff like that's in the BBC archive, a lot of it thankfully deleted, is extremely, so that kind of fits that mode of television. And an awful lot of the gender representations you kind of have to look at as what television was doing at the time as well.
Yeah. I mean, I'd probably go with D. I think it's critiquing. It's still in the mode of critiquing the Doctor and critiquing that enclosed setup of the claustrophobic family that everybody bursts out of during the early and particularly the late 60s as well. Would be my thing. That's really interesting that it's comparable to other Nazi stuff that was getting commissioned.
Yeah, look at the early Dennis Potter commissions. Look at the early Alan Plater stuff.
Yeah, or the Jonathan Miller Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah. It's all. It makes no sense at all, and it's all kind of making broad analogy type stuff, and a very odd. Yeah. There's some very odd telly.
Yeah.
Okay, so we sort of. I feel like Doctor Who kind of, so say it starts out strong. It's got this mission statement. About Barbara, but I think about both men and women, because again, like, Ian isn't an action hero either. Ian's quite sweet, really. Ian's lovely, and he just sort of. I mean, I haven't seen that much First Doctor, so this is definitely one of those generalizations that I said I was going to avoid. But you kind of feel like Ian is just sort of happily accompanying Barbara, just sort of around the place, and it doesn't feel.
It's definitely teen teacher. I think he respects. It's a man who respects this woman.
Yeah, exactly, and he doesn't feel threatened by her competence or in need of sort of proving himself in any particular stupid alpha male way. And for me, it's interesting that kind of that particular dynamic. I think you see, coming back much later on. and in fact with, you know, Ian and Barbara and the Doctor and Susan, and then, you know, much later you have Amy and Rory and the Doctor and River. And there are some kind of quite interesting similarities there in terms of sort of dynamics and what's going on in terms of having a slightly strange space family.
Yeah, you obviously get space family in Unit again, which I think Sam and I were talking earlier, that the Pertwee Doctor is well, we said emasculated, but we didn't like that word. But for want of a better word, the Doctor's power and agency are downplayed.
Yeah, because the third Doctor is exiled to Earth, and the TARDIS doesn't work, and a lot of his stories are about him struggling with that. But it means that for all that he has a job and works with the army and name drops about his friends and wars and stuff, there is an argument which I really like, that's because he's dealing with his own inadequacy, because he's stuck on Earth. So all of his name dropping and being a bit rude to people and whatever actually comes from a deep-seated inadequacy complex
that you so rarely get to see in other people, and they just are instantly best friends. And you know, the episode also does feature the 11th Doctor, and the whole thing is just really gorgeous as a sort of, and that's exactly what I want to see in terms of, you know, where companions have, you know, ended up later on.
Yeah. Sarah Jane Adventures just hits it on the mark again and again and again. I think it really, you look, how just incredible it is that there was a kids program with a lead who was a woman in her 60s. It's just, you know, when do you see that? You know, it's incredible. You know,
and
how brilliant it is.
You know, and she's the one with the knowledge and the power and the fancy tech and the metal dog and the. Well, she doesn't have a metal dog, does it? It's a canine sort of.
She has the side. She has tin dogs.
Yes. Right, and then Mr. Smith, you know, so she really
has
has.
A mentorship role. And what I particularly love is that you see a woman in a mentorship role with young men, which I think is another thing you rarely see as well. And obviously mentorship with the young women as well.
Yeah, so it's a really nice show from a racial representation point of view. And okay, this is again going to go slightly off topic, but just because I feel it's the thing that everybody should know, is that one of the really sad things about the fact that the show had to come to an end was that in the next, I don't know if you guys both know this and if the audience knows this, but in the next series, there was going to be a bit that Russell was really keen on putting in where Luke was going to, so Luke is her adopted alien son, who's a bit of a genius, and goes off, and although he looks quite young, he's gone off to university, and at one point he was going to call back and tell his mum about his new boyfriend.
Yeah, they put that in an early draft of the one where he leaves. Joe Lidster, who wrote that episode, who I know quite well, I read the script, and there's a line, there's something about the thing about Sarah says, you know, and you'll go off and you'll meet people and nice girls. And in the original version of the script, he said, all nice boys. And she looks at him and says, really? And he says, I don't really know. Which I loved. And I thought it was really nice. And they, I think they might have filmed. And it was one of the things that they had to cut for time because it just didn't fit in there, whatever.
That's a shame.
But yeah, all sorts of things about, you know, all the kind of positive role models for boys that aren't about football and fighting, and that, you know, really.
Yeah, and
no women writers on Sarah Jane.
Really?
Oh. Did any women write for the show?
But yeah.
I'd throw that in as just an aside.
Yeah, and I think Clyde is an absolutely fantastic character as well. Clyde is this, you know, sort of. You know, great cocksure kind of black British teenage boy who gets swept up in it all and is really fabulous, and you know, suffers none of the indignities that you see with characters like Mickey.
And enters, I think Clive ends up as point of view character.
Yeah,
it ends up as him.
I think there's something about, I think again, because all of these things often come down to the mechanics of the production.
Yeah.
I think the actor who plays Clive, his name, Daniel. I think he was older. I think he was in his 20s, so that they could use him more.
Right.
Because of the when you're allowed to use people who are younger than whatever it is, and so just from a practical point of view, he became the person that you could do more scenes with. So
Yeah, so I mean, I would definitely say that I feel like the Sarah Jane Adventures are sort of the best of what the kind of Doctor Who universe can be in all kinds of different ways, but you know, in particular in terms of roles that people can have, gender roles, kind of racial representation, I think it does a really, really good job. And I think because, you know, you often get this with children's TV particularly, also family TV, but specifically kids TV, that writers feel more of a sense of, you know, think about it more and feel more of a sense of responsibility because, you know, we do have this idea that, you know, children need role models and they need examples and they need their world to be broadened. And I, you know, unfortunately, there's an idea that once you're not a child anymore, that's not important anymore, which just isn't true.
I would refute that because both Russell and Stephen think about this sort of thing very, very hard.
Oh, yeah.
Stephen was mortified, absolutely mortified, when it was pointed out that in Matt Smith's first year, there was no explicitly gay characters in Doctor Who. And he was absolutely, completely accepting of that criticism, but mortified that, without realising it, because there had been some, and they had, you know, lines had been cut or bits of. So yeah, he made a point of being much more explicit in the next series. Russell likewise talks on one of the commentaries about Noel Clarke, because Mickey's character, as originally devised, was he was supposed to be something that Russell, I think, had first-hand experience of, which was a bullying boyfriend who narrows your horizons and doesn't put you first, as a, you know, who makes your life. He was somebody that the Doctor presenting a better role, you know, person to be with, who offers you escape. So that was kind of his role, and the audience would go, yes, Rose is better with the Doctor. They cast Noel Clarke in a bit of blind casting, which is a very positive thing to do.
Yeah.
That first block that they recorded, Rose Alien to London World War 3, they hadn't quite got the tone of the show right. It's a bit, and they went back and shot quite a lot of it later, once they got the series and the feel of the series right. But it means that Mickey seems to have played a bit slapstick, a bit kind of kids' telly in the way that the drama's done. And by accident, really, they kind of go, oh, that's a completely wrong. And also, Noel Clarke's really charming. And even though he's playing an idiot, the moment that Billy Piper's rude to him, you feel for him. And then you go, no, that's not what the script's supposed to be doing. And so he's supposed to be, when the Doctor calls him an idiot, it's because he's an idiot. Yeah. But somehow in the making of it, and you can see them very quickly get on top of that and revise the character and make him something much more interesting and much more dynamic. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's a really good point. Just to clarify, I meant kind of generally in terms of people who make drama for adults, specifically. So that's been quite a kind of discursive topic that I think, you know, went from Sarah Jane in the 70s to present day. So I'm just conscious of the time. How are we doing? So we've got some time left. I think it'd be good to open it up for some audience questions in a bit, but I'm wondering if we should start talking, you know, just a little bit more about New Who, really, and how we feel that gender is represented, both male and female. So I may kick us off, if I may, and I think that there's a lot of different stuff going on there, and I think that, you know, it's difficult because there's always this contrast between enjoying a character and appreciating all the best of them and all of the great stuff that there is for them and all of the stuff that the actor brings to them, and then looking at them as like, how do they represent their gender? Which can be a very unfair thing to do, because just because a particular character happens to conform to kind of more mainstream or more common things for their gender, that's not a bad thing. Like, there's nothing wrong with women who want to get married, there's, you know, that kind of stuff. But at the same time,
bizarre thing does it make?
Yeah, no, I mean, like, marriage is super weird, and in no way did I get engaged yesterday. Sorry, that was really off topic. But, you know, so I think it's the difference between, you know, and it's a general feminist concept of the difference between people's personal decisions, which, you know, as feminists we would want all people to be able to make, and, you know, the more kind of structural stuff. So there's a lot of that going on, and I think that that does have an impact, because although we have a lot of different women in the show, particularly in New Who, a lot of the time you have one lead female character at a time, and so everything kind of falls on them, which I think is difficult in terms of how people respond to it. Sorry, I'm just going to talk a little bit more and then we will absolutely open up the floor. And I guess for me, and again, this is when people who know me in the room are going to start laughing at me, for me the particularly interesting thing about gender roles in the new series is Amy and Rory. Because I feel like they are a very consciously kind of flipped gender dynamic. Because Rory's a nurse, and Amy is very kind of strident and sort of brash and bad at feelings and sort of, I think, would rather hit something than talk about it. And Rory's kind of a lot, kind of just calmer and kinder. You know, I think Amy is a very, you know, she's a very good person, but she's not always a very kind person. And, you know, they have the kinds of characteristics that you're much used to seeing in other gendered characters. And so for me, that's a really nice thing to kind of watch play out, because although, and I think also it's one of those things that it makes romance part of the show in a big way, but in a really big way, like it probably kind of commits to it. And it's also a story in which, you know, the kind of what Una was saying about the return to the domestic, and obviously that does end up really informing the end of their story. But when they get married, that is not the end. And that was one of the things that I thought was really exciting, because I remember watching The 11th Hour, and you know, you have that shot right at the end and you pan up to the wedding dress, and I kind of went, oh no, this is inevitably going to mean that she has to choose between whether she wants to get married or whether she wants to stay travelling with the doctor, and if she decides to get married, then she'll leave and that'll be that.
And it's much, much better than
Yeah, and instead they just go off on a three-way honeymoon in space.
Yeah.
So character, a coded potentially genderqueer character in Ghostlight with the tuxedo of majesty, which
the slow-mo lesbo pussycat chase in Survival Episode 3. I would recommend, there's an amazing interview with Roman Rowe, who wrote Survival, on David Darlington's website, where he says, tell me about the lesbian subtext in Survival. And so she does at great length. It's amazing, it's absolutely amazing. I tease Sophie Aldred and Lisa Bauman, who play the big pussycat who's chasing her, quite a lot about this.
But yeah, because I mean, I think, you know, throughout Ace's run, there was actually kind of deliberate queer subtext, which is awesome. And so that obviously, you know, kind of shakes up the sort of gender role element of it. And yeah, in general, because she is very, I mean, she's very in the sort of female student to the doctor's professor role. Like, that's a very established thing that they have.
Yeah.
But also her relationship with gender is quite fraught.
Yeah.
I think there's a number of things going on there. Again, to reduce it to the mechanics of the show, Sylvester McCoy has trouble remembering lines and knew he had lots of lines, so he was quite keen that Sophie Aldred, who had a background in experimental theatre and could remember technical jargon, got to do those bits. And so he was quite keen that those bits, and he suggested there should be a sort of, I'm teaching her to be basically I'm teaching her to be a Time Lord. It's kind of the idea that they had. So that she took on more of the exposition and more of the weapons and stuff, which has the effect of making her a more empowered character. But also the writers were very conscious of it, and were trying to write it about girls that they knew. Ian Briggs, who wrote Dragonfire and The Curse of Fenwick, based Ace, he worked in a youth centre, and based Ace on some of the girls that he knew there. I think there are issues in that because of the time it was made in, because you can see it in other drama from the time, you can see it in EastEnders, where they kind of have to signpost the things they're doing with her character. She has to have an Asian best friend whose house is firebombed to be able to talk about those things or whatever, in a way that I think Rose is a very similar character, but they don't need to signpost the things they're doing with it. So
yeah, no, and I think the similarities between Rose and Ace is interesting. I mean, I know that's something that I've heard Sophie Aldred talk about at a convention previously, that she kind of felt like Rose was a little bit of a spiritual successor to Ace, which is a lovely idea. Of that kind of, you know, particular working class background. I mean, because, you know, class is something kind of touched on and all, there's a lot to unpick there. Okay, have we got another question? Okay, I'm going to take the orange there.
Okay. So, how do you think those sort of gender roles and the dynamic would change if a woman were cast as the Doctor?
Ooh, excellent question. So how would those gender roles and dynamics change if a woman was cast as the Doctor? And I think I tragically wasn't in yesterday's panel because of the heartbreaking clash of my soul. But I think we are trying to phrase it as more as a when the Doctor is cast as a woman. And obviously that is going to vastly depend on whether they decide that they want to have want to focus on more male companions or whatever. I mean, I think whatever they do, it will be really fascinating. Because having, because there just aren't enough female characters that have occupied that kind of role of the Doctor, of just being smarter than everybody and not really having time to put up with people's crap. And that kind of, immediately that's going to, really bust open an interesting kind of situation. But in terms of dynamic with a companion, like, what do you think would be the most interesting combo?
I guess I sort of alluded to this earlier with Sarah Jane Adventures, where I think this is sort of prototype of that, and I'm really interested to see a young man who respects the wisdom of an older woman. I think that's a very interesting
I would, just from a mechanical production thing, if you had a female Doctor, you would probably cast a young male actor. So kind of the balance of it would look like in the same way that you have a man and a woman in the TARDIS now. I think they would go the same way. Yeah. There was the panel yesterday was very interesting on whether you'd have a trans Doctor and a trans companion who would be sharing this experience together. I think that's really interesting. I think there's lots of stuff about what pronouns would you use about the female Doctor? Would the female Doctor still be he? Would different people refer to this Doctor differently? All of those things I find really interesting. What would the Daleks do? Because actually, the most interesting thing, when Patrick Troughton took over the Doctor, the companions weren't sure that this new Doctor was the Doctor. The moment it becomes clear is when the Daleks recognise him as the same man. Yeah. And you can see that happening in the show where...
That's quite a common trope,
which
isn't it?
Is saying something really interesting about essential
How would the Daleks,
essence of Doctor.
Would the Daleks notice that the Doctor...
No, I don't think.
All of those things become very interesting.
Do the Daleks even know what a gender is? Have they met one? Would they recognise it in the wild?
There's something amazing about the Sontarans, which the Sontarans are kind of fascinated, especially in Old Who, about the different genders, and they think it's very inefficient. You should change your reproduction system.
Weird, because Strax has that as well in the new series.
But just because I'm quite pure on it, I love the fact that when the Sontarans do that, what they notice about Sarah Jane on more than one occasion is that the construction of her throat is different from men. That's the bit they spot.
There's nothing else there.
I guess they're quite throat conscious.
Yeah. Sarah, you've not noticed anything else. Anything else? No. Sorry.
Okay, so we've got 4 hands up. Okay, so we've got right at the back, there's a right in blue, and then just in front, and then there. So, okay, we start off at the back.
I was actually thinking about the first season specifically, and what you said about Mickey originally being sort of slightly abused idiot. And it made me think a lot of the men introduced at the TARDIS at the start of New Who, even right up to Donna's engaged partner, are actually quite disreputable and actually quite slimy in a way.
Also, male companions generally, there's a problem. In the first and second Doctors, you had a male companion all the time, and the male companion's job was to do the fighting, so the Doctor didn't have to. And John Pertwee did the fighting, and the Brigadier and the unit lot were kind of sidelines, because John Pertwee did that. And when they brought in Tom Baker, where they weren't sure who the actor was going to be, so they created a male companion, Harry Sullivan, so that he could do the fighting. And Tom Baker did the fighting. And they suddenly realised that Harry was kind of redundant. So the way that they dealt with it was to play him for laughs. Yeah. And he's kind of an idiot. The Doctor calls him an idiot quite a lot. And then when you get male companions later in the Peter Davison sort of period, again, what do you do with them? Because you don't want them to take attention away from the Doctor.
With a younger Doctor. Yeah.
So actually, what kind of often happens with male companions is to make sure that they don't take attention from the Doctor. You make them clumsy or stupid or do stupid things. I think you could argue that male companions come off far worse than female companions. You can see it in Galaxy 4 where Stephen Taylor spends the whole of an episode unconscious because they've got nothing for him to do.
Yeah.
You can see that with Jamie in the Moonbase. He spends most of it asleep.
Yeah.
All of those kind of mechanical things are again just because of the way the programme's made and the decisions that get made as you're making it. I think
we call this character a bumble dad, so it's the like the dad in Peppa Pig who's a bit of an idiot. So it's a kind of trope.
Daddy Pig.
Daddy Pigs. I'll know this soon.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're running out of time, so just to take.
Just the thing that originally started me thinking of it was, I can't remember his name, but it's a male character introduced in the TARDIS in the first season.
Adam.
And his only purpose is to try and rip off the future and take it back with him.
Yeah, I mean, Adam's definitely sort of like this is how not to companion, like, don't do...
And he's there specifically and structurally to show you how good Rose is. But Rose, who kind of gets some stuff wrong in the end of the world, has got it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she's got what it's about and whatever. Yeah. So that's about underlining.
And still you're getting that thing of the Doctor being a different model of masculine, that he's your boyfriend, is that, you know, yes, that.
Yeah, okay, great. So we can take, right in blue.
I just wondered what people's thoughts were about River, and in particular that we see her as a character from being a knowledgeable, like older, experienced person. We see her get younger and no less, and how that fits into the gender.
Okay, so just to repeat that, how do you feel about River Song, and in particular that we see her start as an older, more knowledgeable character and then get younger and no less? And I think that it's important to bear in mind that that's what happens, because I feel like occasionally some of the stuff that I read about River sort of forgets that and implies that kind of, you know, oh, well, they've completely messed up her characterization, and I'm like, well, I mean, that could be true, but it's not true for that reason, because we know she's going to become this thing and this is how she got there and we're just watching it the wrong way round. And that might not work for some people, which is completely fine. I mean, I think River, again, because, I mean, River, when she's introduced, like, River is the female Captain Jack, right? That's kind of what she's there to do to a certain extent. And, you know, you get all of these kind of riffing parallels. She's from the 51st century, we're told. She's pretty kind of flirty and pansexual and has cool tech and sort of rattles the Doctor. And then, you know, initially in her first two-parter, and then obviously they get Alex Kingston back and she becomes this, you know, really major recurring character who's actually now been in enough episodes to have an entire season. And I think that all of that stuff, you know, whilst her arc does end up revolving a lot around the Doctor, you know, she still has she just has so much fun all the time, which I think is really nice to see. And again, in particular, kind of the, you know, older women thing. I mean, the whole, like, the age difference between her and Matt Smith, which bothers some people, and I'm like, yeah, the Doctor is a lot older than River, you're right. You know, so I think the casting of her is part of what makes it really great, and also just because Alex Kingston's fabulous. But just this fantastic over 50 woman having the best time, getting to be adventurous and kind of sexy and mysterious and all of that. Like, we need more of that, absolutely.
I agree with all of that. It's one of those narratives that just doesn't work for me. I possibly, because I'm just a bit old now, I really struggle making sense of the narrative. And I also, this is just one of those things that either you buy or you don't. I don't buy the chemistry between Matt Smith and Alex Kingston. But I think
tell you you're incorrect. But that's okay. You can say that.
I am indeed incorrect.
I had a lot of problems with it. I'm not quite sure what it was until The Impossible Astronaut, where there's that scene between her and Rory, where she talks about the relationship, and it's a tragedy, and she's putting on she's putting on a brave face about the fact that the Doctor knows her. And I just thought, oh, that's really beautifully done, and I really like it in principle. I find some of the execution a bit not quite.
Yeah.
To use the actory term, I don't find it very true. That there's something that's not quite. But I love the fact that Stephen was expecting to cast an older Doctor to play against Alex Kingston, and Matt Smith came in and went, what do we do? We should just do it anyway and see what happens.
With a sense of regional masculinity or national masculinity and playing with that by casting Christopher Eccleston, who has a northern accent and really has a rough look about him with a buzz cut and leather jacket, but he's so graceful and he's knowledgeable and he harbors a lot of sort of feminine emotions. I mean, there's that moment when he says, just this once everyone lives, where he looks like he's about to break down in tears. I did, but he almost did, you know, so do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, definitely. So I just realised that it is now past, so people need to... so can we sneak in 5 more minutes? Is that okay? But if people need to go, then obviously please do. So in terms of, so that was a question about kind of regional and national masculinity, and in particular Christopher Eccleston's performance as this sort of quite rugged northern character who also had, you know, a lot of emotion going on. And yeah, and I think that is something that's really, you know, because I think, yeah, probably the Ninth Doctor is one of the ones who looks more like he might be your typical leading man in sci-fi, and isn't at all. You know, and I think that's the thing with all the Doctors, they kind of look like they might be a certain way, and then it doesn't really play out like that. So yeah, no, and I think that definitely moving away, and also because Nine really wanted to move away from the sort of Edwardian gentleman stereotype in terms of sort of the upper class southern thing, which I think is good. I'm excited about Capaldi getting to keep his Scottish accents as well. I think it's going to be really good. So yeah, it's definitely nice to kind of break that up a little bit. Okay, and then we say we have a hand at the back.
This hand's been up.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Fabulous. Please go ahead.
I was wondering, how important do you think the profession of the companion is? Because it's something that's bothered me a little bit in New Who, the sort of companion roles. Their jobs outside of the TARDIS seem to be hastily shoved in, particularly how Amy goes from being a model to a travel writer, which I find is a bit like, oh, we made a mistake, model, not feminist. Travel writer, much better. And how important do you think that is?
I think there's a number of things there. One of which is that the kind of idea with that, which I'm not sure was clearer in a draft of a script that I saw, is the fact that Amy can't hold down the job because it doesn't matter. And that's actually based on the former astronauts who went to the moon. And if you look at what their lives were like afterwards, some of them found peculiar religion, some of them found alcohol, some of them... Because what do you do after you've been to the moon? Nothing seems very important. Those day-to-day... And you can see that they're trying to articulate that in an hour of 3. Yeah, I don't think they necessarily got that to feel right. But yeah, I think, you know, as I said before, a lot of the companions are scientists in games because it helps the stories and helps the structural stuff. But if you've been to space, how would you go to a job? How would you go and teach kids in school?
It's not just after, it's sort of sometimes before. I know as part of the actualisation process that they achieve a career or something like that to reward for the Doctor. But none of them in the new series, they don't seem to have, like, you've had people ask, I'm a scientist, you know.
Yeah, well, I think Martha
with the exception of Martha,
is the one really who's kind of, you know, she's got the vocation. I think there's a couple of interesting things there. Because no, I think you're right, and I think, yeah, I definitely think that the stuff with Amy's career is really interesting and does fit her character, but isn't quite developed enough for it to really make sense. You kind of have to do a little bit of mental jumping to figure out what's going on, just in terms of the way it actually played out. And one thing that I do have a bit of a problem with is the narrative that is given to both Rose and Donna. I think if it had been one or the other, I wouldn't have minded. But basically, being working class in London is barely even worth bothering with. It's just the worst. Working in a shop or working as a temp is just so...
You think Donna's working class? She was in Chiswick.
I mean, but...
She couldn't afford to live in Chiswick if she was working class.
That's true. She's very middle class, yeah.
I mean, I think the way that kind of... okay. All right.
I mean, anyway, the accent.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, that may have been a mistake on my part in terms of talking about class, but I think, you know, this sort of demeaning of those kinds of lives. Because, I mean, it's fair enough that Rose doesn't want to be a shop assistant forever, like, that's okay, some people do, some people don't, but that whole, I mean, that voiceover that she has about, for the first 19 years of my life, nothing happened until I met the Doctor. Like, obviously, you know, travelling space is very, very different from working in a shop, but it's this sort of slightly recurring thing that then means that it's very difficult to go, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but yeah, I think, you know, so something like Martha with a vocation, and I know we're overrunning, but one thing I just realised, we haven't talked about Clara at all, and one thing I did want to say that I think I really like about her character in terms of gender roles, and in terms of thinking about how not, you know, you can't expect one character to represent their entire gender, but given the vast range of female characters we get in Doctor Who, what I really like about Clara is the fact that it is a specific skill that she has, that she's good with kids, and that she is kind of a live-in nanny for a while, and now she's a teacher, and we see her be very, very good with children in that very sort of adult, slightly professional kind of way. And so I guess I really like that that's a specific character trait that she has and that it comes in handy, as opposed to just, oh, well, girls are good at that sort of thing. So I'm really interested to see how that's going to play out in the new series, because now we've seen her teaching right back at the school where everything started, which is really lovely. And it feels like, and I mean, that does feel to me like a natural progression from what we saw her doing before, which we knew wasn't so. She's been looking after this family in a time of crisis. She likes working with kids, but this isn't exactly what she wants to do. And now she's decided to become a teacher. So I hope that we see more of that, and more of her kind of wanting to do that kind of thing going forward. Do you want to talk about anything about that, and then we're probably going to have to wrap up.
Yeah, I mean, yes, that will work for me. If it falls into a sort of she's nannying the bumble doctor, then that's where I think it would become unhelpful. But
I like to see Capaldi being a bumble doctor.
It is.
I can't really.
When it's not being signalled to us, I think. So let's see how it plays out. You know, I'm not for it. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So I mean, we'll be around to chat after the panel, but I just wanted to give both our panelists a chance to share any final thoughts.
Castable.
A good one.
Yeah.
And writing one. That would help.
Yeah. Hire us. Yeah.
Also get women on the writing team. Joanne Harris has been at the con this weekend talking about how much she wants to write an episode of Doctor Who. Like, can someone make that happen, please? Because it would be amazing. Also, Mallory Blackman, she also wants to write Doctor Who. I'm just saying.
It's a hard sell. I do know women who have been involved in writing Doctor Who that didn't make it to the final stage, and I do know they've asked big name women that would impress, that they would impress to sell it, who've turned them down because it's basically, if you are a successful writer who has their own stuff, you're taking a cut to work on somebody else's show, and for a long time, because Doctor Who's a complicated show that takes lots of drafts to on it for months. So there are sadly practical reasons why I still think it's not right, but there are practical reasons.
Yeah, no, I mean, I have heard that too. Nonetheless, we need to do the thing. Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you all so much for sitting and listening, and for your contributions. And yes, I hope it's been interesting. Have we got anything else left in the Doctor Who track? What's coming up? Do we know?
There's Lambert versus RTD.
Ooh, is it going to be a bum fight? Because that'd be exciting. Have we got like some mud wrestling?
Verity would eat it for breakfast.
I know, it'd be great.
All Verity fans on this side of the room, Russell fans on this side of the room, and weapons will be distributed.
Okay, RTD versus Lambert. Excellent. All right, well, yes, thank you all so much.